This is the sensor reading that bites common sense like a wall. President Trump of the United States has ordered 2 nuclear aircraft carriers to be sent to Russia. Currently, the relationship between the United States and Russia is truly crossing a point of no return. Let's take a proper look at the broken relationship between the United States and Russia. Let's get right into it. President Trump previously demanded an end to the war in Ukraine and asked Russia for a ceasefire by August 8th. Meanwhile, President Trump pressured Russia, threatening to impose high tariffs. As the August 8th tariff deadline neared, President Putin of Russia, who had been silent until then, expressed his opinion. In the end, he rejected President Trump's ultimatum. President Putin stressed that his peace terms, clearly outlined last June, remain the same. In June 2024, Russia demanded Ukraine renounce NATO membership, withdraw from Russian-occupied areas, and lift Western sanctions as conditions for a ceasefire. President Putin of Russia demanded these same conditions. Simultaneously, Medvedev, the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, harshly criticized President Trump. Via Telegram, Deputy Chairman Medvedev advised President Trump to consider the United States show The Walking Dead and referenced the ex-Soviet Union's automated nuclear strike system. In the case of this dead end, it refers to a command system designed to automatically launch nuclear missiles if Russia's leadership collapses due to an enemy attack. President Trump demanded tariffs and a quick end to the war in Ukraine, so they responded with a nuclear threat. In fact, up until now, Russia has consistently threatened the West by mentioning the nuclear card since the early days of the war in Ukraine. President Putin and Deputy Chairman Medvedev have engaged in psychological warfare by publicly hinting at the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons and releasing videos of nuclear weapon drills. Since President Trump took office, the situation has changed slightly. President Trump began to take more friendly actions toward Russia, and in response, Russia also seemed to restrain itself from using nuclear weapons as a last resort and tried to keep military tensions below a certain level. However, from President Trump's perspective, who wants to end the war in Ukraine, the war keeps going on. He began to increase the pressure on Russia, and as President Trump intensified the pressure, Russia immediately started to bring out its nuclear card. And Russia, as if mocking President Trump's final warning, continued to intensify its airstrikes on Ukraine. When President Trump demanded that they stop the airstrikes, Russia immediately launched more airstrikes on Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Internal Affairs, at least 26 people were killed and 159 were injured in Russian airstrikes on August 1st. There were also a significant number of children among the victims. Kyiv has decided to declare August 1 as a day of mourning. President Trump has since often shown sides of himself that had not been seen before. Previously, Trump had been very friendly towards Russia, but now he continues to criticize the country. On August 1st, President Trump described President Putin as a difficult person to deal with. As I mentioned earlier, he also said that when he saw bombs exploding and people dying in Kyiv and other cities, he thought President Putin might try to take everything. President Trump also stated that when these airstrikes happened, he found Russia's actions disgusting. The fact that President Trump described Russia as disgusting shows how he views Russia. President Trump posted on Truth Social that he had deployed 2 nuclear submarines near Russia in response to their nuclear threats. The deployment of these nuclear submarines is likely a routine event, because out of the 71 nuclear submarines the United States has, about 20 are always deployed at sea. During times of heightened tension, nuclear submarines are regularly moved near Russia, so their deployment is not particularly surprising. The issue is that mentioning this publicly is very unusual. The Times of London analyzed this as President Trump sending a message to President Putin through his actions. Nuclear submarines constantly deployed near Russia, but verbal mention strongly implies readiness to act. The breakdown in United States-Russia relations has led to extreme military tension, which will have significant impacts going forward. In reality, the possibility of a full-scale United States-Russia war remains low, but it was tremendous. Both countries are nuclear-armed superpowers, and the moment they go to war, it would be World War III, so the leaders of these countries are unlikely to actually start a war. No matter if it's President Trump or President Putin, they both have enough sense not to go to war. However, the likelihood of accidental military clashes occurring more often in the future is very high. Especially in strategic areas near Russia like the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, and the Arctic Ocean, tensions are rising. In these areas, both sides' reconnaissance agencies are conducting frequent close flights. In the future, laser pointer aiming, electromagnetic interference, low-altitude fighter jet threats, flights, high-speed approaches, and sudden evasive maneuvers may become more frequent. Given the complete breakdown of United States-Russia relations, such incidents are not surprising. Also, there's a good chance that Russia will use bombers or military aircraft to approach the United States mainland, showing a display of force. Non-military underwater clashes may include sonar frequency interference, sound wave threats, or even cutting undersea cables. If these situations persist, the United States and Russia may face domestic pressure from hardliners, potentially leading to gradual military escalation due to political pressure. At the very least, the pressure will not decrease. If anything, it will only increase compared to now. This escalation of conflict increases the risk of military clashes and more. There may be massive impacts across global economy, diplomacy, and the energy market. The world might be standing in a calm before the storm right now. Russia appears to be attempting to alleviate United States pressure through diplomatic means. Two recent developments have come to light. It's about India and Laos. According to a New York Times report, the United States pressured India to reduce its imports of Russian oil. India appeared to have accepted the demand. However, new reports have completely changed the situation. The Indian government maintains its unchanged policy of buying Russian oil. Randir Jaiswal, India's Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson, said that India and Russia have a long-standing cooperative relationship, and this issue should not be viewed from a third country's perspective, suggesting India will not yield to United States pressure. A key aspect of President Trump's Russia policy is to pressure other nations to avoid buying Russian goods, resources, and energy. India has openly opposed the issue, while Russia appears to have been providing covert assistance to some degree. Following the Ukraine war's onset, India substantially boosted its Russian crude oil imports. Since they could buy a lot of crude oil at a cheap price, it was a great situation for India. India is currently the second biggest importer of Russian crude oil after China, importing over 2 million barrels daily from Russia. Russian oil accounts for more than a third of India's total crude oil imports, but India has continued to import Russian crude oil even as it goes against the United States. Laos is also strengthening its ties with Russia. On July 31, President Putin held a summit with President Thonglan Sisoulith of Laos at the Kremlin in Moscow, and afterward announced plans to build a railway passing through Laos and China. Recent news suggests that Laos may send around 50 soldiers to Russia, indicating strengthening ties between the two countries. Russia also mentioned expanding energy cooperation with Laos. President Putin also stated during the talks that the agreement on the peaceful use of nuclear energy opens the way to provide Laos with affordable and environmentally safe energy for its economy. Russia continues to strengthen cooperation with third world and authoritarian countries in an effort to escape this kind of pressure from the United States. Russia's complete surrender requires a tight blockade, which is the crux of the issue. The current international economic sanctions against Russia aren't effective because not all transactions with Russia have been severed. Realistically, this is also hard to do. If Russia can't be isolated from international transactions and cooperation, President Trump's pressure on the country will ultimately fail. The United States isn't foolish, so they're well aware of this. That's why I think they might pull out another card and put more pressure on Russia. Another key factor to consider here is China's response. China is closely observing the United States-Russia conflict and taking steps to bolster its strategic stance.
It seems so. Recently,
China has conducted military drills with Russia and is substantially increasing economic cooperation. This indicates a plan to exploit the United States-Russia conflict to create a self-centered supply chain and security framework. If this multilateral diplomacy persists, United States unilateral pressure may become ineffective. We now stand at the brink of a new Cold War, or possibly a more perilous and unpredictable hot war. President Trump takes action in response to President Putin's mockery, while countless civilian lives hang in the balance. On August 8th, will the world reach a new turning point, or will nothing significant happen? What do you think the outcome of the strained United States-Russia relationship will be? Please share your thoughts in the comments. That concludes this video. Thank you.